A single slap. That's all it took. Not a gunshot in the dead of night or a hostile takeover in a boardroom, but the sharp, ugly sound of a hand striking a cheek in a room full of whispers and champagne. The hand belonged to Richard Hawthorne, a man whose net worth was matched only by his ego. The cheek belonged to his wife, Genevieve, 7 months pregnant with his child. And the audience, his new younger mistress, Tiffany, who watched with a triumphant smirk. Richard believed he was untouchable, a king in his glass castle. He thought the slap was an ending. He had no idea it was the beginning. Because while he slept off his victory, a quiet, calculated storm was gathering. And by the time the sun rose over the city, his entire empire would have a new owner. The Hawthorne penthouse wasn't a home. It was a statement. Perched 50 floors above the sprawling metropolis, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the world Richard Hawthorne believed he owned. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine. Italian marble, exotic woods, and gleaming chrome that reflected a life of curated perfection. It was a space designed to intimidate, to showcase power, and for Genevieve Hawthorne, it had become the most beautiful prison in the world. For 5 years, she had played her part flawlessly. The intelligent, elegant wife of the financial titan, Richard Hawthorne. She had been a corporate lawyer once, sharp and ambitious, with a promising career ahead of her at a top-tier firm. Then she met Richard. He was a force of nature, charming, relentless, and dazzling. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of a world she'd only read about. He'd convinced her to leave her career behind, arguing that his was more than enough for both of them. "I need a partner, Jenna," he'd said, his voice like warm honey. "Not another employee. I need you by my side, helping me build our legacy." And she had believed him. In the beginning, it was intoxicating. The galas, the travel, the sheer, breathtaking luxury. She hosted his dinners, charmed his business partners, and became the serene, smiling face of the Hawthorne dynasty. But slowly the gilding on the cage began to chip away, revealing the cold iron bars beneath. Richard's charm was a tool switched on for an audience and off in private. His affection was transactional. The gifts became apologies for his absences, the compliments a prelude to a demand. His control was absolute, yet subtle. He didn't forbid her from seeing her old friends. He simply scheduled a last-minute, critically important client dinner on the same night. He didn't criticize her intelligence. He just patronizingly called her sweetheart when she offered an opinion on financial matters, gently reminding her that she was out of the game now and should leave the heavy lifting to him. He isolated her so expertly that she barely noticed it was happening until she found herself standing in a crowd of 100 people at one of their parties, feeling utterly alone. The pregnancy had changed everything. For Genevieve, it was a miracle, a tiny, fluttering promise of unconditional love. She had hoped it would change Richard, too. Soften his hard edges and remind him of the legacy he was so obsessed with building. For a brief time, it seemed to work. He was attentive, parading her and her burgeoning belly around like his newest, most prized acquisition. He commissioned a nursery that cost more than her childhood home and hired the best doctors in the country. But the novelty soon wore off. His attention drifted. The late nights at the office returned smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually face down and passcode protected. Genevieve wasn't naive. She knew. The whispers among the city's elite were barely whispers at all. They were spoken in hushed but clear tones in the powder rooms of exclusive clubs and over brunches at Michelin-starred restaurants. The name on everyone's lips was Tiffany Monroe, a 24-year-old Instagram model with ambitions as transparent as her designer dresses. Genevieve had tried to confront him once, calmly, rationally. "Richard, are you seeing someone else?" He hadn't even had the decency to look her in the eye. His gaze fixed on the stock ticker running across the giant screen in his home office. "Don't be dramatic, Genevieve. I'm a busy man. You're emotional because of the pregnancy. Why don't you go buy yourself a new handbag? Get the Birkin you were looking at." He dismissed her feelings and their marriage with a casual wave of his hand, reducing her concern to a hormonal whim that could be placated with expensive leather. That was the moment. The last vestiges of love in her heart curdled into something else. Something cold, hard, and patient. She was a lawyer, after all. She had been trained to see every angle, to anticipate every move, and to prepare for the worst-case scenario. And Richard Hawthorne, in all his arrogant glory, was about to become her worst-case scenario. Her old mentor, Arthur Pembroke, a lion of the legal world now in semi-retirement, had warned her when she married Richard. "Be careful, Genevieve," he'd said over a quiet lunch. "Men like Hawthorne don't build empires, they conquer them, and they demand utter fealty from everyone in their kingdom, especially their queen." He had helped her structure the prenuptial agreement. Richard's lawyers had been ferocious, but Genevieve, guided by Arthur, had been smarter. She'd fought for clauses they'd dismissed as standard boilerplate. And deep within the labyrinthine document, unseen and underestimated by Richard's team, who were focused only on the division of assets. In a standard divorce was a particular section Arthur had called Project Nightingale. It was a fail-safe, a dead man's switch of sorts. It wasn't about divorce. It was about a catastrophic breach of trust so severe and so public that it constituted a fundamental destruction of the marital contract. It granted her unilateral and immediate power of attorney over a specific set of holding companies if certain conditions were met. Richard had signed it without a second thought, laughing with his attorney about how thorough his little lawyer fiancé was. He had no idea he had just handed her the keys to his kingdom. The upcoming annual Heart of the City charity gala was the pinnacle of the social season. Richard was being honored. It was a night meant to celebrate his philanthropy, to whitewash his ruthless business practices with a veneer of generosity. Genevieve knew it would be a spectacle. She also had a gnawing certainty that Richard, emboldened by the public adoration, would do something reckless. A week before the event, her private investigator, a discreet man named Mr. Jones, confirmed her fears. He sent a single encrypted file to her laptop. It contained photos. Richard and Tiffany Monroe dining at a private club. Richard and Tiffany, his hand possessively on her back, entering a boutique hotel. Richard and Tiffany laughing on the balcony of a hotel suite, a bottle of champagne between them. Genevieve stared at the screen, her heart a block of ice in her chest. The pain was sharp, but it was quickly overshadowed by a terrifying clarity. She looked down at her swollen belly, feeling the gentle kick of the life inside her. This was no longer about her pride. It was about her child. Her child would not be raised in the shadow of this man's disrespect. Her child would not be a pawn in his games, or a footnote in the story of his affairs. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Arthur," she said, her voice steady. "It's Genevieve. I think the nightingale might need to sing soon." There was a pause on the other end. Then Arthur's grave voice replied, "I'll put the orchestra on standby. Just give me the signal, my dear. Just give me the signal." The night of the gala arrived. Genevieve chose a gown of deep sapphire silk that hugged her baby bump, a color that spoke of royalty and strength. As she put on the hawthorn diamonds, a magnificent necklace Richard had gifted her after a particularly lucrative merger, they felt cold against her skin. They felt like chains. Richard, preening in his custom-tailored tuxedo, barely glanced at her. "Ready, sweetheart? It's a big night. Lots of important people. Remember to smile." "I'll remember," she said, her voice a placid lake over a raging current. As they descended in the private elevator, the mirrored walls reflected their image, the powerful tycoon and his beautiful pregnant wife, the perfect couple. But Genevieve saw the truth. She saw a monster and a woman who was about to bring his entire world crashing down. The signal was about to be given. The grand ballroom of the Prescott Hotel was a universe of manufactured glamour. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a golden glow on the city's most powerful figures. The air hummed with the sound of clinking glasses' forced laughter, and the relentless orchestra playing just loud enough to drown out the sincerity of any real conversation. To Genevieve, it felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Richard was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a shark, all teeth and predatory charm. He accepted backslaps, shook hands, and basked in the glow of adoration. Genevieve remained at his side, a silent, smiling prop. She saw the glances from the other wives, a mixture of pity and envy. They pitied her for her husband's well-known indiscretions, but they envied her for the very cage she was trapped in. An hour into the affair, Genevieve saw her. Tiffany Monroe. She hadn't come in discreetly. She'd made an entrance. She wore a crimson dress, so scandalously cut it seemed held together by ambition alone. It clung to her surgically perfected curves, a stark and deliberate contrast to Genevieve's elegant maternity gown. She wasn't a guest at a table. She floated near the bar, a seaman waiting for her ship to come in. Her eyes fixed on Richard. Richard, who was in the middle of a conversation with the mayor, saw her too. A flicker of something annoyance mixed with arousal crossed his face. He excused himself and made his way towards the bar, leaving Genevieve standing with the mayor's bewildered wife. It was a public, deliberate snub. The first of the evening. Genevieve watched them. Richard didn't touch Tiffany, not yet, but the intimacy was there. The low murmur of their voices, the way he leaned in the proprietary look in his eyes. The whispers in the room, which had been a low hum, began to grow in volume. People shifted their gaze from Richard and Tiffany back to Genevieve, watching for her reaction. She gave them none. She simply stood a marble statue of grace, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The main event of the evening was Richard's speech. He took the stage to thunderous applause, accepting the Philanthropist of the Year award. He spoke eloquently, his voice resonating with false humility. He talked about community, about giving back, about legacy. He even mentioned his beautiful, supportive wife, Genevieve, who is carrying our future, the next generation of the Hawthorne family. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost breathtaking. As the crowd applauded, Genevieve felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. While the room gave him a standing ovation, Richard's eyes scanned the crowd and found Tiffany. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a shared moment of triumph, and Genevieve was not a part of it. After the speech buoyed by the applause and several glasses of scotch, Richard's arrogance swelled to its breaking point. He strode back to Genevieve not to thank her, but to lead her towards a quieter alcove near the French doors that led to a terrace. She thought for a foolish second that he might apologize for his behavior. She was wrong. Waiting for them in the alcove, a smirk playing on her lips, was Tiffany Monroe. "Richard, what is this?" Genevieve asked, her voice dangerously low. "Genevieve Tiffany," Tiffany Genevieve. He said the words, slurring slightly. He seemed to find the situation amusing, a display of his ultimate power. He could have both of them here in the same room. Tiffany looked Genevieve up and down, her gaze lingering on her baby bump, with undisguised contempt. "So you're the wife," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Richard's told me so much about you." "I'm sure he has," Genevieve replied. Her eyes locked on Richard. "This is wildly inappropriate." "Oh, relax, sweetheart," Richard scoffed, draping an arm casually around Tiffany's shoulders. "Tiff's a friend. I wanted you two to meet. We're all adults here." "A friend?" Genevieve's voice was like chipping ice. "Is that what you call the woman you're sleeping with? The woman you flaunt in front of the entire city while your pregnant wife stands by your side?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Richard's jovial mask dropped. His face darkened with rage. He hated being challenged, especially in a way that threatened his carefully constructed image. "You're making a scene, Genevieve," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You're embarrassing me." "I'm embarrassing you," she shot back, her control finally snapping. "You bring this this woman here to an event where you're being honored, and you have the audacity to say that I'm embarrassing you. I warned you," Richard snarled, stepping closer. His scent expensive cologne and fine scotch was suffocating. "You're emotional. You're hysterical. You need to learn your place." "My place?" Genevieve laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "My place is not to be a silent doormat for your infidelity. My place is not to stand here and be humiliated. Your place," he said, his voice dropping to a growl, "is to do what I tell you." And then it happened. In a flash of liquor-fueled rage, Richard raised his hand. The slap was shockingly loud in the relative quiet of the alcove. It wasn't a tap. It was a full-force blow, hard enough to snap Genevieve's head to the side and send a spray of pain across her face. The force of it made her stumble back a step, her hand flying to her cheek, the other instinctively clutching her belly. For a moment there was absolute silence. The orchestra seemed to have faded away. The world narrowed to that single searing point of impact on her skin. She could feel the imprint of his fingers. She could taste blood in her mouth, where her teeth had cut the inside of her lip. Tiffany Monroe's smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of shock, perhaps even fear. She hadn't expected this. This wasn't part of the fantasy. Genevieve slowly turned her head back to face Richard. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her eyes, which had been filled with hurt and anger moments before, were now chillingly empty. They were two black voids. It was the look of a person who had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The pain on her cheek was a distant thing. The real event had happened inside her. Something had been irrevocably broken, and in its place something new and terrible and strong had been forged. She looked at her husband, the man who had just struck his pregnant wife in front of his mistress. She looked at his furious, unrepentant face, and she gave the signal. It was almost imperceptible. She reached into her clutch for a handkerchief to dab at her lip. As she did, her thumb pressed the side of her diamond-encrusted phone case twice. It was a pre-programmed emergency command, a simple, innocuous action that no one would ever notice. The command sent a single encrypted toast message to a burner phone on Arthur Pembroke's desk. The message contained only one word, Nightingale. Genevieve met Richard's furious gaze one last time. She said nothing. She simply turned her posture as straight and unbowed as a queen's, and walked away. She walked out of the alcove, through the now silent crowd that parted before her, like the Red Sea, and out the grand entrance of the hotel. She didn't look back. Richard left, standing with a stunned Tiffany shouted after her. "Genevieve, you get back here, don't you walk away from me." But she was already gone. He thought she was running away in defeat. He thought he had won. He swaggered back to the bar to get another drink, basking in his power, utterly oblivious that he had just signed his own death warrant. The slap wasn't the end of the argument. It was the trigger. The final condition of Project Nightingale had been met, a fundamental breach of trust accompanied by physical violence and public humiliation. The clock had just started ticking on the Hawthorne Empire. The cold night air hit Genevieve like a tonic, clearing the last vestiges of shock and leaving only crystalline resolve. She didn't hail a cab. A black town car, unmarked and discreet, pulled up to the curb the moment she stepped out of the hotel. The driver, a man she knew only as Robert, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. He was on Arthur's private payroll, a ghost who specialized in quiet efficiency. Inside the car was a sanctuary of silence. She leaned her head back against the cool leather, the throbbing in her cheek a dull metronome counting down the seconds of Richard's reign. She didn't go back to the penthouse. She would never set foot in that place again. Robert drove her to a location she had secured weeks ago, under a false name, a suite at the exclusive Windsor Arms, a hotel known for its old-world discretion and ironclad privacy. The suite was not opulent like her former home. It was functional, elegant, and secure. On a large mahogany desk in the living area, a suite of brand-new encrypted electronics was already set up and waiting. A laptop, several monitors, and a satellite phone. Arthur Pembroke believed in preparation. She took a moment in the marble bathroom, looking at her reflection for the first time since the slap. A faint, angry red mark was blooming on her left cheek. Her lip was slightly swollen, but her eyes held a fire that had been dormant for 5 long years. The woman staring back at her was not the socialite Genevieve Hawthorne. It was Genevieve Alcott, the top-of-her-class law graduate, the woman who could dissect a hostile takeover brief in a single night and find the single fatal flaw. She took a deep breath, splashed cold water on her face, and went to work. She picked up the satellite phone and dialed. Arthur answered on the first ring. "Nightingale is confirmed," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Trigger conditions met in full. Physical violence, public humiliation, corroborating witnesses. We are a go." "My God, Genevieve, are you all right?" Arthur's voice was filled with genuine concern. "I will be," she replied. "Is the team ready?" "They've been on standby for the last hour, ever since your text. Legal finance and cyber ops. My best people. They are awaiting your command." This was the culmination of 18 months of painstaking preparation. Ever since Genevieve had first confirmed Richard's infidelity, she and Arthur had been building this arc. They had meticulously mapped out Richard's vast and complicated financial empire. He thought his assets were an impenetrable fortress spread across dozens of shell corporations, offshore accounts and blind trusts, all registered in different jurisdictions from the Cayman Islands to Switzerland to Delaware. He believed it was too complex for anyone, especially the wife he thought of as a decorative object, to ever unravel. He had made one colossal, arrogant mistake. Early in their marriage, in a bid to streamline control and minimize his tax burden, he had consolidated the ultimate ownership of nearly everything: the real estate, the stock portfolio, the private equity stakes, the art collection, even the ownership of the jet and the yacht under a small handful of Delaware-based holding companies. And it was his signature sitting on the Project Nightingale clause within their prenup that gave Genevieve the key to those companies. "Execute," Genevieve said into the phone, her voice ringing with authority. Phase 1 effective immediately. Executing, Arthur confirmed. Across the city and around the world, a ghost army came to life. In London, a legal team Arthur had on retainer was already awake, it being the middle of the night. They received a single coded email. They immediately began filing the pre-drafted notarized paperwork with the relevant international authorities, citing the power of attorney now activated by the trigger clause. They were transferring ownership of Richard's European stock holdings and his Swiss bank accounts. The documents were ironclad, bearing Richard's own signature from years ago. In the Cayman Islands, a financial consultant woken by a 3 a.m. call logged into a secure portal. He initiated the transfer of control for 3 major offshore accounts, moving billions in liquid assets from entities controlled by Richard Hawthorne to new entities controlled by G.A. Pembroke, a trust Genevieve had set up with Arthur, with her and her unborn child as the sole beneficiaries. In New York, a small team of cybersecurity experts working from an anonymous office in Soho launched their part of the operation. This wasn't illegal hacking. It was a hostile administrative takeover. Using the legitimate credentials now legally belonging to Genevieve, they began a systematic lockout. They changed the passwords and security protocols for Richard's trading platforms, his corporate bank accounts, and his personal lines of credit. They accessed the digital management systems for his properties, changing the access codes to the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and the Miami condo. They even changed the ownership registration and deactivated the key fobs for his fleet of luxury cars. Back in her hotel suite, Genevieve directed the entire orchestra. She was on a 4-way encrypted conference call with Arthur and the heads of the legal and financial teams. Spread before her on the monitors were real-time updates of Richard's crumbling empire. She watched as asset after asset turned from red Hawthorne-controlled to green Pembroke Trust-controlled. It was a breathtakingly complex and aggressive series of moves, all happening in the space of a few hours, while the man at the center of it all was completely unaware. Meanwhile, Richard Hawthorne was celebrating his victory. After Genevieve had stormed out, he had put on a show of nonchalance, laughing it off to the few who dared to ask. He took Tiffany by the arm and paraded her through the rest of the gala, a conqueror displaying his spoils. They left the hotel together, paparazzi cameras flashing, and went to Richard's favorite downtown haunt for a nightcap. He was drunk, arrogant, and triumphant. "She'll come crawling back," he boasted to Tiffany as they sat in a plush booth, champagne flowing freely. "She always does. She has nothing without me. She knows which side her bread is buttered on. A little drama to keep things interesting, that's all." Tiffany, now basking in the glow of being the chosen one, eagerly agreed. She had no idea that the credit card Richard used to pay the exorbitant bill, a black card with no supposed limit, was mere hours away from becoming a useless piece of plastic. They finally stumbled back to the Hawthorne penthouse around 4 a.m. Richard dismissed his security detail with a wave feeling invincible. He collapsed into his bed, not even noticing Genevieve's side was empty and cold. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of a king who believes his castle walls are impenetrable. He didn't know that miles away, his queen was systematically dismantling the castle brick by brick and salting the earth where it once stood. By 5:30 a.m., it was done. Genevieve stared at the final screen, a sea of green. From the multi-million-dollar penthouse he was sleeping in, to the stocks that formed the bulk of his wealth, to the very cash in his current accounts, it was all gone. His name had been surgically excised from every significant asset he possessed. He wasn't just broke, He was a non-entity, a ghost in his own life. She leaned back in her chair, the first rays of dawn beginning to streak the sky. The longest night of her life was over. For the first time in 5 years, she felt a profound sense of peace. She placed a hand on her belly. "It's over," she whispered. "We're safe now." She closed the laptop, switched off the monitors, and went to the bedroom. For the first time in a very long time, she slept without fear. Richard Hawthorne awoke at 9:00 a.m. to the insistent pounding in his head. A Scotch-fueled hangover was his unwelcome companion. He rolled over, expecting to see Genevieve perhaps with a glass of water and an apologetic look on her face. The space beside him was empty. A faint, unfamiliar scent of Tiffany's perfume lingered on the pillows. He grunted. The woman had slipped out at some point. Good. It saved him the trouble of kicking her out. He sat up, rubbing his temples. He felt a brief flash of irritation at Genevieve for her dramatic exit. She'd be back, of course. He'd let her stew for a day or two. Then he'd buy her a new piece of jewelry, and everything would go back to normal. That's how it worked. That's how it had always worked. He reached for his phone on the nightstand to check the morning markets. He frowned. No service. Strange. The penthouse had its own dedicated signal booster. He tried to connect to the Wi-Fi. Access denied. A flicker of annoyance. He'd have to call building maintenance. He got out of bed and walked to the kitchen to get some coffee. He pressed the button on his $1,000 espresso machine. Nothing happened. He checked the plug. It was in. He looked at the smart home control panel on the wall. The screen was black. A building-wide power outage, unlikely in a place like this. Slightly irritated, he decided to just get dressed and head to the office. He'd grab coffee on the way. He showered, dressed in a crisp Brioni suit, and headed for the elevator. He pressed the button. The light didn't come on. He pressed it again harder. Nothing. He tried the service elevator. Same result. He was trapped on the 50th floor. Now the annoyance was turning into genuine anger. He called his building manager's office from the landline, which was miraculously still working. "Mr. Hawthorne," the manager said, his voice unusually formal. "Good morning. We were notified of a change in ownership for the penthouse unit early this morning. Our instructions are that all services, including elevator access, are to be restricted pending authorization from the new owner's representatives." Richard felt a cold laugh bubble in his chest. "A change in what?" "Don't be ridiculous, Ben. There's been a mistake. Some kind of clerical error. Get my elevator turned on." "I'm sorry, sir," Ben said, his voice firm. "My instructions come from Pembroke Legal Group. They are very clear. I cannot override them." Pembroke, Arthur Pembroke. Genevieve's old mentor. What the hell was going on? A knot of unease began to twist in Richard's stomach. He hung up and immediately dialed his personal banker, Jonathan Pierce, at Sterling Chase Private Bank. Jonathan was more than a banker. He was a friend. They played golf together. "Richard, big night last night, I hear," Jonathan said cheerfully. Jonathan cut the chatter. "I'm having some bizarre issues here. I need you to look into something. My building manager is claiming my penthouse has a new owner, and my electronics are all dead. It's got to be some kind of prank or a massive screw-up." There was a pause, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. The silence stretched. "Jonathan," Richard prompted, his voice sharp. "Richard." Jonathan's voice was different now, strained. I'm looking at your portfolio right now. Or what was your portfolio?" "Richard." "What the hell did you do? What did I do?" What are you talking about? According to the documents filed with us at 010 Zorwar GMT, under a power of attorney clause invoked by Pembroke Legal. One hunt of your assets held at this bank, your primary checking, your money market accounts, your entire securities portfolio were transferred out. The accounts were then closed. Richard, your net balance with Sterling Chase is 0. The phone felt slippery in Richard's hand. That's impossible. That's theft. Sue them, freeze everything. We can't, Jonathan said, his voice barely a whisper. The paperwork is impeccable, Richard. It's got your signature on it. It's a contingency clause from your prenuptial agreement. Our legal department has already reviewed it. It's ironclad. We have to comply. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Richard's hangover. This was a nightmare. It had to be. He hung up on Jonathan and frantically tried to log into his E-Trade Pro account on his laptop. The password had been changed. He clicked Forgot Password. The recovery email wasn't his. It was a coded address he didn't recognize. He ran to his walk-in closet to the safe, hidden behind a fake panel where he kept emergency cash and bearer bonds. He punched in the code. Access denied. The code had been changed. He felt the walls of his penthouse, his beautiful glass castle, begin to close in. He was a prisoner in a home that was no longer his. He was locked out of a fortune that had vanished overnight. He called his head of security. Get the cars. Get me out of here. I'm sorry, Mr. Hawthorne, the man replied, his voice stiff. We received a notification from the leasing company. The contracts for all vehicles under your name have been terminated, and the cars have been remotely disabled. A repossession team is on its way. The phone clattered from his hand. He stumbled back and sank onto a ridiculously expensive sofa that he no longer owned. The scope of the catastrophe began to dawn on him. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a prank. This was a coup. A systematic, brutally efficient annihilation of his entire existence. Genevieve. It had to be her. The quiet, docile wife he had so casually dismissed. The sweetheart who was out of the game. She had done this. The thought was so preposterous, it was almost unbelievable, yet it was the only possible explanation. Project Nightingale. That forgotten clause. The thing he'd laughed about, rage pure and undiluted, replaced the panic. How dare she? After everything he'd given her, the lifestyle, the diamonds, the prestige, he had created her and she had turned on him. He had to find her. He had to confront her, force her to reverse this. He still had one asset they couldn't touch, his own formidable presence, his power to intimidate and command. He would find her, and he would break her. But first he had to get out of the penthouse. He looked at the fire stairs, 50 floors. Cursing, he kicked over a priceless vase, which shattered on the marble floor. It made a satisfyingly loud noise, the last act of ownership he could perform. Then Richard Hawthorne, the titan of finance, the master of the universe, began the long, humiliating walk down 50 flights of stairs, emerging sweaty and disheveled into a world that no longer recognized his authority. He tried to use his credit card to hail a cab. Declined, the driver grunted, before speeding off, leaving Richard standing on the curb, a king, without a kingdom, his name worth less than the suit on his back. It took Richard 3 hours of frantic, humiliating calls to finally locate her. His lawyers wouldn't take his calls, citing a conflict of interest. His so-called friends suddenly had meetings they couldn't miss. Finally, a sycophantic junior analyst at his old firm, either out of fear or a misplaced sense of loyalty, gave him the information he wanted. Genevieve wasn't hiding. She was waiting for him. The address was the Windsor Arms. The irony was bitter. It was a place he admired for its understated power, a power he now understood far better. He arrived on foot, his expensive suit rumpled his face a mask of fury. He didn't have the money for a cab and had been forced to navigate the indignity of the city's subway system. He announced himself at the front desk, expecting to be turned away. Instead, the concierge smiled politely. "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne. Ms. Alcott is expecting you. The penthouse suite. Please go right up." Ms. Alcott, not Mrs. Hawthorne. The name was another deliberate cut. The ease of access was another power play. She wasn't afraid of him. She was inviting him into her new domain. The elevator ride up was silent and tense. When the doors opened directly into the suite's foyer, he saw her. She was standing by a window overlooking the park, bathed in the afternoon light. She wore a simple cream-colored cashmere dress. She wasn't wearing a single piece of Hawthorne jewelry. Her face was serene, and the faint bruise on her cheek, now a pale yellow-green, seemed less a mark of injury and more a badge of honor. Standing beside her, a formidable and silent guardian, was Arthur Pembroke. "Genevieve," Richard growled, stalking into the room. "What is the meaning of this madness? You will call it off right now." Genevieve turned to him, her expression unreadable. "There's nothing to call off, Richard. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. Please have a seat. You look stressed." Her calmness infuriated him more than any screaming match could have. He ignored the offered chair. "A notification. You steal my entire life's work, everything I've built, and you call it a notification. I will destroy you for this. I will bury you in litigation for the rest of your life." Arthur Pembroke stepped forward slightly. "I wouldn't advise that, Richard," he said, his voice calm but layered with steel. "Every action taken was 100% legal, executed according to a contract that you yourself signed. Any lawsuit you file will be summarily dismissed. And given that all your funds have been legally transferred, I must ask who will be paying for your legal team." Richard's jaw clenched. He turned his glare back to Genevieve. "Why? After everything I gave you, the houses, the cars, the clothes, I gave you a world you could only dream of." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Genevieve's face. It was not sadness, but a profound, weary pity. "You gave me things, Richard," she said softly. "You never gave me respect. You thought of me as your most valuable possession, and you treated me accordingly. You isolated me, belittled me, and when I finally dared to have a voice, you silenced it with your hand." She touched her cheek lightly. "That slap. It wasn't the reason I did this. It was just the catalyst. It was the moment I realized that if you could do that to me, your wife in public, what would you do to our child behind closed doors? What kind of legacy would you be building for him? A legacy of cruelty, of disrespect, of learning that love is conditional and power is everything. This is about our child," he scoffed, incredulous. "You've left him with nothing. You've ruined his future." "On the contrary," Genevieve said, walking over to the desk. She picked up a single file folder and handed it to him. "I have secured it." Richard snatched the folder and ripped it open. His eyes scanned the documents inside, and the last bit of color drained from his face. It was the charter for a new entity, the Alcott Pembroke Foundation. 50% of your liquid assets," Genevieve explained calmly, "have been placed into an irrevocable trust for our child. He will be cared for, educated, and want for nothing. He will have every opportunity, but he will not be raised with the corrosive sense of entitlement that you have. The principal cannot be touched by anyone, myself included, until his 25th birthday. Richard's hands were shaking as he read further. The other 50%, she continued, along with the proceeds from the liquidation of all properties, vehicles, and art, will be used to endow this foundation. Its mission will be to provide legal aid, shelter, and financial support for women and children who are victims of domestic abuse at the hands of powerful men. Your name, your legacy will be to fund the recovery of every woman you are a type of. He looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with horror. She hadn't just taken his money. She had weaponized it against everything he was. She had turned his monument to greed into a monument of restitution. It was a checkmate so complete, so philosophically perfect, it left him breathless. The penthouse you woke up in this morning. It's being sold. The proceeds will fund a new shelter in the city centre. The Hamptons estate will fund their legal defence wing. Your prized collection of sports cars will pay for counselling and job training for dozens of women. You didn't just lose your fortune, Richard. You donated it. He stared at her, the architect of his ruin. The woman he had dismissed as a pretty bauble. He saw now the brilliant, strategic mind he had tried so hard to snuff out. He saw the lawyer she used to be, resurrected with a vengeance. "You can't do this," he whispered, the rage gone, replaced by a hollow despair. "Please, Genevieve. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Don't do this to me." It was the first time she had ever heard him plead, but it was far too late. "The divorce papers will be filed this afternoon," she said, her voice final. "Citing irreconcilable differences and your public affair. I'm not asking for a single cent in alimony. I don't need it. I have my own work to do now." She walked back to the window, turning her back on him, a clear dismissal. The meeting was over. "Oh, and Richard," she added without turning around. "Arthur was kind enough to leave a small sum, $10,000, in a new bank account under your name. A gesture of goodwill, to help you get back on your feet. $10,000, to a man who 24 hours ago had measured his worth in billions. It was the final, most devastating insult. It wasn't just a defeat, it was an erasure." Arthur Pembroke stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder, guiding him toward the door. "I believe your time here is done, Mr. Hawthorne." Richard stumbled out of the suite, a broken man. The elevator doors closed, and in their polished surface he saw the reflection of a stranger, a pale, haggard man in a rumpled suit holding a folder that detailed the complete and utter demolition of his life. He had slapped his pregnant wife in front of his mistress, certain of his absolute power. By morning, he was nobody. And the woman he had tried to break was now poised to use his own empire to build a better world. 8 months later, the city was moving into the crisp embrace of autumn. The leaves in Central Park were turning shades of amber and gold, the same colors that now defined the welcoming reception area of the Alcott Pembroke Foundation. The headquarters were not in a shimmering skyscraper, but in a beautifully restored brownstone, a building with history and warmth. It felt solid, grounded, and safe, everything Genevieve's old life was not. Genevieve Alcott, no longer Hawthorne, sat at a large oak table in a sunlit conference room. Spread before her were architectural plans for a new transitional housing unit. But her attention was focused on the source of a soft gurgling sound coming from a bassinet beside her. She smiled, reaching down to gently stroke the cheek of her 6-month-old daughter, Grace. The baby had her mother's calm eyes and a spirit that was thankfully entirely her own. Arthur Pembroke looking more vibrant than he had in years, sat opposite her reviewing a budget proposal. He was not just a mentor anymore. He was family, a doting honorary grandfather who visited the foundation almost daily. The construction bids for the West Side shelter came in under budget, he announced, a proud twinkle in his eye. Your reputation precedes you, Jenna. Contractors are lining up to be associated with the foundation. It's good for their image. Genevieve laughed, a genuine, easy sound. Let them have the good press, as long as the work gets done and the women who come to us have a safe place to land. Her life was now a whirlwind of board meetings, fundraising, site visits, and strategy sessions. She worked harder than she ever had as a corporate lawyer. But this work filled her with a profound sense of purpose that no multi-million-dollar merger ever could. The story of Richard Hawthorne's fall and the subsequent rise of the foundation had become a national sensation. Genevieve, once a footnote in the society pages, was now a celebrated advocate, a symbol of quiet strength. She had given interviews not to gossip columns, but to serious journalistic outlets, always steering the narrative away from her personal drama and towards the cause she now championed. She had turned her pain into a platform. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Hawthorne stared at the flickering screen of a second-hand laptop. His world had shrunk to the four walls of a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a nondescript building with peeling paint in the hallway. The $10,000 had run out months ago. He had tried to get back into the game, calling old contacts, but his name was poison. No one would touch him. The public humiliation, compounded by the story of the foundation funded by his own fortune, had made him a pariah. He was a cautionary tale, told over expensive lunches he could no longer afford. He was attempting to day trade. With the last few $100s, he had a pathetic echo of the billion-dollar trades he once executed with a single word. Every small loss felt like another twist of the knife. He saw Tiffany Monroe's face on a gossip website, sometimes draped over the arm of a new benefactor, a German industrialist. She hadn't even called. The television in the corner of his room was tuned to a local news channel. A reporter was standing in front of the familiar brownstone. The Alcott Pembroke Foundation today announced a new partnership with the city to provide pro bono legal services for victims of domestic violence, the reporter said cheerfully. Founder Genevieve Alcott, a powerhouse in her own right, continues to turn her personal triumph into a victory for thousands of women. Richard threw the remote control at the screen, a surge of impotent rage coursing through him. He still couldn't comprehend it. In his mind, he was the victim. She had taken everything from him. He refused to acknowledge the slap, the affairs, the years of emotional neglect. He saw only her betrayal, her cold, calculated theft. He had not learned a single thing. His arrogance was the one asset she hadn't been able to strip from him, and it was the very thing that kept him trapped in his own bitter prison. Back at the foundation, Genevieve stood up and lifted Grace from her bassinet, holding her close. The baby smiled, reaching a tiny hand up to touch her mother's face. Genevieve looked out the window at the bustling street, at the world she was now actively trying to improve. She had lost a husband, a home, and a life of unimaginable luxury. But she had gained herself. She had secured a future for her daughter, not of empty wealth, but of meaningful worth. Richard's legacy was a pile of ash. Hers was being built brick by brick, life by life, a fortress of hope rising from the ruins of a gilded cage. And it was a legacy that would last. And so Richard Hawthorne's gilded world didn't just crack. It was systematically dismantled and repurposed. He learned the hard way that true power isn't measured in stock portfolios or penthouses, but in the resolve of a person you've pushed too far. Genevieve Alcott didn't just seek revenge. She sought justice and transformation. She took the resources built on arrogance and greed and forged them into a shield for the vulnerable, creating a legacy for her child, built not on wealth, but on worth. Her story is a stark reminder that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you ever make, and that from the ashes of a painful ending, a powerful new beginning can rise. What do you think of Genevieve's plan? Was it a masterclass in justice, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were moved by this story of strength and consequence, please smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-life dramas. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a single story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.